At the end of the last episode, I finally had an answer: insulin resistance. For weeks, I've been asking myself one question: how did this happen? And honestly, I remember feeling relieved, not because I liked the diagnosis, far from it, but because uncertainty is exhausting. When you don't understand what's happening inside your body, your imagination fills in the blanks. Every meal feels suspicious. Every symptom feels they're connected in some way. Every lab results become another mystery. At least now I knew what I was dealing with, or so I thought. The next day after I found out I was pre-diabetic, I did exactly what I think most people would do. I opened my laptop and I started searching, Googling, can prediabetes be reversed? What's the best diet? Should I stop eating carbohydrates? Should I fast? Should I lose weight? And what kind of supplements actually work? At first I felt hopeful. Surely there had to be a clearer answer, right? But the more I searched, the less certain I really became. And this is on top of my background as a healthcare provider, as a researcher. And one expert told me to avoid carbohydrates completely. Another told me carbohydrates weren't the problem. One recommended keto diet, and one swore that fasting worked. Another warned, though, against it. Everyone sounded pretty confident. Everyone had their evidence. Everyone seemed certain they were the one that was right. I remember sitting there staring at my screen thinking, who am I supposed to believe? And I bet a lot of you who Google your own symptoms go through this the same way. Up until that moment, I've been asking, what advice is right? I've been giving advices to my patients, but that's actually not the question researchers ask. Researchers ask, what explains biology? And I already knew my diagnosis: insulin resistance. Instead, I decided to chase mechanisms. I stopped asking, well, what's the best diet? And started asking if insulin resistance is the problem. What would biology predict that would make it better? That single question changed pretty much everything, because now every piece of advice had to answer one question. And not, does this sound convincing, but why would this work? Why is this method better? If I understood why, I could decide whether it belonged in my life. For the first time, I wasn't collecting tips. I was building a framework around my diagnosis and looking for patterns. As you know, one advantage I do have was knowing how to read scientific literature. My gosh, I've been reading scientific literature for years. And that doesn't really mean that I knew the answers. Clearly, I didn't. I had just become pre-diabetic, but I did know something important. One exciting study doesn't change medicine. Patterns do. A lot of studies. So instead of searching for miracle foods or miracle supplements, I looked for consistency. What recommendations kept appearing? No matter who was doing the research, different researchers, different countries, different patient populations, different study designs. And you know what kept showing up as the days went by? I noticed something. Everything seemed to point toward the same destination: improve insulin sensitivity. Not lower blood sugar for one afternoon, improve insulin sensitivity. Not lose 10 pounds as quickly as possible, improve insulin sensitivity. Different paths, same destination. I wasn't finding random health advice. I was discovering a system, a pattern that worked. What surprised me most was that it wasn't sugar, it wasn't carbohydrates, it wasn't even food. It was muscle. Honestly, I didn't expect that. If you had asked me before my diagnosis what mattered most in diabetes, I probably would have answered food, nutrition. That's important too. And I think that's what most people think. Diabetes is about food, right? But paper after paper kept bringing me back to skeletal muscle. I remember leaning back in my chair, looking at another article thinking, am I missing something? I always thought of muscle as something that helped us move or lift or stay strong as we age. I had never really thought of it as one of the body's most important metabolic organ. Then it clicked. Every time we eat, glucose enters our bloodstream. And one of the biggest places that glucose is supposed to go is skeletal muscle. If muscle responds well to insulin, glucose has somewhere to go. If muscle doesn't, the pancreas has to work harder. More insulin, more keys. Remember? Over time, higher blood sugar. That wasn't fitness advice. That was biology, and suddenly, exercise had a completely different purpose. I wasn't exercising to burn calories. Actually, I was doing that too. I was exercising because I wanted healthier muscle. Healthier muscle meant better insulin sensitivity. That single realization changed the way I thought about exercise forever. And that's why these lifestyle matters, the two key things, the diet and exercise. Another question, of course, inquiring minds want to know, if healthier muscle helps remove glucose from my bloodstream, what determines how much glucose enters my bloodstream in the first place? And that question followed me into my kitchen. And for a long time, I thought successful people simply had more willpower than anyone else, that they somehow resisted temptation better, stayed disciplined longer, and made better decisions. Then I started paying attention to my own life. The days I exercised weren't always days that I felt motivated. Not motivated every day, right? Sometimes I simply walked into the garage because my shoes were already on and my purse was right at the door. The days I ate the breakfast that I planned were because I woke up craving protein. It was because I had already bought the groceries. The decision had been made days earlier. And that was eye-opening. The behavior I thought depended on willpower often more depended on preparation. The healthiest choice wasn't easier because I had become stronger, I had more willpower. It was easier because I had removed some of the friction, some of the barriers. I used to think my environment was just background, something I lived in, didn't really pay attention. But behavioral science tells a different story. Our environment quietly shapes thousands of our decisions, which we may not even notice. What's sitting on the kitchen counter? What's in the refrigerator? How far away the gym is? Whether walking shoes are by the door, are they available, or buried in the closet somewhere? These little details seem insignificant until you repeat them every day. I didn't redesign my life overnight. I made small changes. Healthy foods became the easiest foods to reach. My workout clothes were ready the night before. Walking became part of my routine instead of something I had to schedule. None of these changes felt dramatic, but together they made healthy decisions require less effort. And I began to understand something. I wasn't trying to become more disciplined. I was trying to make discipline less necessary and easier to do. I know a lot of people that if you want to eat healthy, you may have to meal prep for the following week. And myself, I don't do meal prepping that often. Actually, very rarely do I do that. But I do stock my refrigerator with things that are healthy for you. So mostly whole foods, vegetables, fruits, and lean protein. And I don't stock my refrigerator with processed foods. Now, once in a while, I do get the munchies and I want a good Dorito chips, and I'll have that. but 90% of what I consume is relatively healthy. And as for exercise, I've been doing it for years, so it's become almost a habit, and I enjoy the environment. Now, am I motivated every day? Not necessarily, but going to, let's say, CrossFit for me, doesn't necessarily give me just the workout. It's about being in an environment where there are other people, and being around other people who are doing the same exercise motivates me. So I think it's important as you look into your own behavior just to see what motivates you. And for me, it's taking group classes. Now, I'm not perfect, and one of the biggest mistakes I made in the past was believing one bad day erased all the good ones. I was really guilty of that. Miss one workout, the week's totally ruined. Eat one unhealthy meal, start again on Monday. I'm embarrassed to admit how often I used to think that way. Then I realized that's not how biology works. My muscles don't disappear because I missed one workout. My insulin sensitivity doesn't vanish because I enjoyed dessert at a birthday party or a date night. Health isn't built by one decision. It's built by thousands of ordinary ones. That realization changed how I responded to setbacks. So instead of asking, did I fail today? I started asking, well, what does tomorrow look like? Can I make some changes there? And that kind of question helped me moving forward and not stepping back. And somewhere along the way, something changed. I can't tell you the exact day. There wasn't a celebration, no dramatic breakthrough. One morning, I just simply realized that I wasn't thinking about it anymore. It was just happening, a pattern. Preparing breakfast was no longer felt like a health intervention. Walking wasn't part of treatment plan. Strength training wasn't something I had to convince myself to do. Now, some days I do. I do have to convince myself. But most of the time, it's quietly become part of my life. And I think that's what habits really are. Not just repeated actions, but repeated actions that become part of your identity, part of your world. At some point, I stopped trying to become someone who exercised. I simply became someone who exercised. That may sound like a small difference. It isn't. One depends on motivation. The other becomes part of who you are. Looking back, I don't think reversing my prediabetes happened because I found the perfect diet or the perfect exercise workout or the perfect supplement. It happened because I stopped chasing perfection. Instead, I built a system around my environment. Then I built routines that supported that system. Eventually, those routines became habits, and those habits slowly became part of my identity. That transformation didn't happen in one weekend. Parts of it I've been doing my whole life. It happened one ordinary day at a time. People sometimes ask me, what was the hardest part of reversing your prediabetes? And it wasn't learning the science. It wasn't changing my breakfast. It wasn't changing my exercise. The hardest part was becoming the kind of person who could keep doing those things regularly, long after the excitement of a new diagnosis had faded. Because motivation fades. Life gets busy. Unexpected things happen. But identity has a way of carrying us through the days when motivation disappears. When I first saw that my A1C of 6.2%, I thought I needed to change my blood sugar. Looking back, I think what really changed was me. And that raises one final question. A year later, when the excitement was gone, when this had simply become everyday life, did it actually last? That's where the story goes next. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video. Bye-bye.